two small holes, side by side, punched through the top of a child's skull. They are not cracks, not the ragged damage of a falling rock, or the slow work of water and time. They are neat, oval, and spaced about 3 centimeters apart, the exact distance between the lower canine teeth of a leopard. The child was not human, not quite. The bone is close to 2 million years old, unearthed from a cave in southern Africa. And for decades, the story we told about our earliest ancestors was almost the opposite of what that skull records. We imagined them as hunters, clever, armed, ascendant. The first animals to look at the world and see meat. The holes in that skull tell a different story. For most of the time our lineage has existed, we were not the thing to be feared. We were something that other animals ate. Which raises a question that turns out to be far stranger than it first appears. Because our ancestors did not stay in one place. They walked out of the world they knew and into landscapes filled with animals no primate in our family tree had ever laid eyes on. Cats the size of small horses. Hyenas built like bears. Lizards longer than a car. Marsupials with jaws that could shear bone. So what actually happens, biologically, psychologically, culturally, when a human being meets a predator their species has never seen before? What does a mind do when it has no memory to draw on, no inherited warning, no name for the shape moving toward it? The answer is written into the way you flinch at a garden hose. It is carved into the walls of caves in France, and it may be the reason our species invented monsters. To understand any of it, we have to begin with the man who got the story exactly backwards. In 1924, a limestone quarry in South Africa produced a fossil that would upend the study of human origins. A young anatomist named Raymond Dart received a crate of rock from a place called Tong, and inside it he found the face and partial brain case of a small child with a mixture of ape and human features. He called it Australopithecus, the southern ape. Dart went further. Over the following decades, he excavated more sites, and at a cave called Makapan's Ghat, he found hominin remains mixed with a chaotic mass of broken animal bones, fractured skulls, splintered limbs, antelope jaws worn smooth at one end, as though gripped. Dart concluded that he was looking at a weapons workshop. He argued that these small, upright apes had used bone, tooth, and horn as clubs and daggers, and that they had used them not only on antelope, but on each other. He described our ancestors as habitually violent creatures whose appetite for killing had driven the growth of the human brain. It was a powerful, terrible idea, and it escaped the laboratory almost immediately. It became the killer ape. It filtered into novels, into films, into the popular sense that civilization is a thin crust over something savage. There was only one problem. Nobody had checked who else had been living in those caves. The man who checked was a quiet South African zoologist named Charles Kimberlin Brain, known to everyone as Bob. In the 1960s, he began working at Swartkrans, another cave in the same cluster of limestone hills, and he approached the bones with a question no one had thought to ask seriously. Not what did these hominins do, but what happens to a bone in a cave, and how does it get there in the first place? Brain did something almost absurdly patient. He collected modern bones. He studied the refuse piles of Twisama villages to see what goats look like after people and dogs are finished with them. He examined the discarded remains beneath leopard feeding sites. He learned to read the difference between a bone broken by a stone and a bone broken by a jaw, between the scrape of a tool and the parallel grooves left by carnivore teeth. And slowly, the cave at Swartkrans stopped looking like a home. The hominin bones showed carnivore tooth marks. The assemblage matched what predators leave behind, not what tool users accumulate. Then came the fossil that made the argument unforgettable. A juvenile hominin brain case, catalogued as specimen SK54, with those two clean punctures in the top of it. Brain fitted a fossil leopard's lower jaw, recovered from the same deposits, to the holes. The canine slid in. The picture that emerged was of a leopard carrying a young hominin up into the branches of a tree that grew from the mouth of the cave, the way leopards still cache their food today, out of reach of hyenas, and dropping the remains into the shaft below. Over tens of thousands of years, the shaft filled. Brain gathered all of this into a book, and the title was a rebuke aimed straight at Dart. He called it The Hunters, or The Hunted. Picture the ground beneath such a tree. Bones accumulating in the dark for 1,000 generations. The geological record of a very ordinary arrangement, in which our ancestors occupied a familiar place in the food web. Not at the top, and it was not only the cats. Return to that first child from Tong, the one Dart described. In the 1990s, a young paleoanthropologist named Lee Berger became curious about how such a small, fragile skull had come to rest in that particular deposit, mixed with the remains of small animals rather than large ones. The assemblage did not look like a big cat's leftovers. It looked like something else entirely. Berger went looking beneath the nests of African crowned eagles. Crowned eagles are extraordinary animals. They are not especially large, but they are astonishingly powerful, and they specialize in monkeys, striking from cover, killing prey heavier than themselves, then dismembering it, and carrying pieces to a nest. Beneath those nests, bones pile up. And when researchers examined monkey skulls from those piles, they found a distinctive signature: puncture marks and scratches in the thin bone at the back of the eye sockets, where an eagle's rear talon hooks in to hold the skull steady. Berger examined the Tong child. The same damage was there, in the same place, on the floor of the orbit, small, precise, easy to overlook for 70 years. The evidence suggests that the first specimen of Australopithecus ever found, the fossil that opened the entire field of human origins, was very likely carried into the darkness by a bird. Stop for a moment on what that means for daily experience. If you were a small upright ape on the ancient African veld, danger did not come from one direction. It came from the grass, where things coiled and waited. It came from the shade of trees at dusk, where cats lay flat. And it came from directly above, silently, out of an empty sky. 3 worlds of threat, 3 entirely different responses required. And here is where the story turns from bones to minds, because that threefold structure did not vanish. It is still running in primates today, and you can hear it. In the Amboseli Basin of Kenya, 2 researchers named Robert Seyfarth and Dorothy Cheney spent years recording the calls of vervet monkeys. Vervets are small, sociable, and extremely talkative, and the scientists noticed that their alarm calls were not simply louder or softer versions of one panic. They were different sounds altogether, and each one produced a different behavior in the troop. So the researchers hid loudspeakers in the bushes and played the calls back with no predator present. The leopard alarm sent the monkeys racing up into the trees. The eagle alarm made them look up, scanning the sky, then dive into low, thick cover where a diving bird could not follow. And the snake alarm produced something almost uncanny. The monkeys stood upright on their hind legs and searched the grass around their own feet. 3 words, 3 pictures of the world. A monkey hearing a recorded sound in an empty landscape does not just feel afraid. It appears to know what kind of danger it is and where to look. Our ancestors carried. Not a general capacity for fear, but a set of specific pre-wired templates for particular enemies, refined over tens of millions of years of being eaten by cats, birds, and snakes. One researcher, Lynn Isbell, has pushed the idea further, proposing that snakes were the oldest predators of primates, and that the pressure to spot a motionless, camouflaged, quiet killer at close range helped shape the primate visual system itself. Our sharp, forward-facing eyes, our unusual sensitivity to certain shapes and patterns. It remains a hypothesis, argued over and far from settled, but it points at something worth sitting with. The templates are old, older than our genus, older perhaps than our hands, which sets up the central problem of this story. A template is a memory of the past. It works beautifully when the future resembles the past, and roughly 2 million years ago, our ancestors began doing something that guaranteed the future would not. They started walking north. In the hills of what is now the country of Georgia, on a promontory where 2 rivers meet, sits a medieval village called Dmanisi. Beneath the ruins, archaeologists found something that should not have been there: the remains of early humans, small, brained, and short, alongside simple stone tools, in sediments about 1,770,000 years old. These were among the first members of our lineage to leave Africa, and Dmanisi preserves them in remarkable detail. 5 skulls. One belonging to an old individual who had lost nearly every tooth, the jawbone reshaped by years of chewing without them. A person who somehow kept living long after they could no longer process food the way their companions did. But look at what else came out of that ground. Saber-toothed cats. Giant hyenas, heavier and more powerfully built than any hyena alive today. Wolves. A long-legged cat resembling an oversized cheetah. Not one of these animals existed in the world their inherited alarm system had been built for. The specific silhouettes, the specific hunting styles, the specific times of day and kinds of terrain, all new. And every year they walked further, into Europe's forests, into the cold grasslands of Asia, meeting cave lions larger than any lion now living, cave hyenas that denned in caverns and dragged food inside, and Homotherium, the scimitar cat, with short curved blades for teeth and long forelimbs built for open country. Here is the question that hangs over the entire human expansion, and it has no tidy answer. A vervet monkey inherits the word for leopard. What does an animal do when it meets a predator for which it has no word? There are 2 possibilities, and both are visible in the record. The first is that you die, and your bones join the pile. Across Europe and Asia, some of the caves that preserve early human remains were not human shelters at all. They were hyena dens. At a cave on the Italian coast called Guattari, a Neanderthal skull was found in 1939, lying inside a rough circle of stones. And for decades it was described as evidence of ritual, a trophy, a shrine, a hint of dark ceremony. Later analysis pointed somewhere far less mysterious and far more sobering. The stones were probably natural, the bones had been gnawed, the cave had been occupied by hyenas, and the Neanderthals inside it were most likely part of what the hyenas brought home. The second possibility is stranger, and it is the reason you are here to hear this. You can learn, not as a species, over hundreds of thousands of years of natural selection, but as an individual within days, and then you can tell someone. This is the trick that changes everything. A monkey's alarm call names a category the species already knows. Human language can describe a thing no one has ever met. It can transmit a shape, a habit, a place to avoid, from a person who survived an encounter to a person who has not yet had one. Information about a novel predator can travel faster than the predator can travel. It can outrun the danger. And there was one other technology, arriving in the same long span of time, that rearranged the balance more decisively than any weapon: fire. The evidence for its earliest controlled use is patchy and fiercely debated, but there are sites that make a strong case. At a place called Gesher Benot Yaakov in the Jordan Valley, in sediments around 780,000 years old, excavators found burnt seeds, burnt wood, and burnt flint clustered in specific spots. Not the scatter of a wildfire, but concentrations, in the same places, layer after layer. Someone was making fire in the same corner of the same camp for a very long time. We usually talk about fire as cooking, and cooking matters enormously. But think about what a fire does to a night. Every large predator on Earth hunts by advantage. Better night vision, better hearing, better stealth. Darkness is not merely when predators hunt. Darkness is the tool. And our ancestors had done something biologically reckless. They had come out of the trees. A chimpanzee builds a fresh nest in the branches every single evening, a meter or two above the reach of a leopard. Somewhere in our past, we stopped doing that. We began sleeping on the ground, in the open, unconscious, for hours at a time, in a landscape full of things with teeth. It pushes back the edge of the dark. It fills the air with a smell that says something dangerous is here. And it means that among a sleeping group, there is always a point of light, and usually someone awake beside it. Imagine lying on your back beside that fire, 70,000 years ago, in a landscape where the eye shine at the tree line belongs to an animal your grandparents never described to you. You cannot see it clearly, but it can see you, and it has stopped moving, and it is doing arithmetic about the flames. That is the moment where our relationship with predators begins to invert, not with a spear thrust, with a decision made by an animal in the dark that this particular prey is no longer worth the trouble. And then something extraordinary happens. Once the fear becomes survivable, it becomes something else. It becomes art. In 1994, 3 cave explorers in southern France followed a draft of air out of a rock face and dropped into a chamber that had been sealed by a landslide for tens of thousands of years. The cave is called Chauvet, and the paintings inside it are among the oldest known, roughly 36,000 years old, made when the ice sheets still lay heavy across the north. What makes Chauvet strange is not its age, it is the subject matter. Much later cave art is dominated by food. Horses, bison, deer, aurochs, the animals people hunted. Chauvet is full of predators. There are dozens of lions on those walls, drawn with a fluency that is almost painful to look at. A group of them moving together, low and intent, the shoulders and the shifting weight caught in a few charcoal strokes by someone who had clearly watched lions closely and lived. There are rhinoceroses, and bears, and a leopard, and hyenas. And the floor of the cave belongs to another animal entirely. Chauvet is scattered with the hollows that cave bears dug for hibernation, and with their skulls and claw marks. Cave bears were enormous, and they used the same caves that people used, presumably not at the same moment. A shared address negotiated by the calendar. In one chamber, a cave bear skull sits on a fallen block of stone, alone, facing outward, apparently placed there by human hands. Home. We have no idea what that meant. It could have been ceremony, it could have been curiosity, or a joke, or a warning. But it is not the behavior of an animal that simply flees. It is the behavior of a mind that has begun to hold its predator at a distance and turn it over. And then there is the object that goes further still. In a cave in southern Germany, in a valley of the river Rhone, excavators recovered hundreds of fragments of mammoth ivory that were eventually assembled into a standing figure about 30 centimeters tall. It is roughly 40,000 years old, among the oldest figurative sculptures ever found. The body is human, upright, with legs, arms held close, a posture unmistakably ours. The head is a lion. We call it the Lion Man. Nobody knows what it was for, but consider what has to occur inside a skull for that object to exist. Somebody took the animal that had hunted their lineage for millions of years and combined it with themselves. Not a picture of a lion, not a picture of a person, a third thing, which had never existed and never would. For most of the history of life, a predator was a problem to be solved. At some point in the deep past, for exactly one species, it became a symbol. If following the long, strange arc of how our ancestors survived adds something to the way you see the world, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It quietly helps these stories find the people who like difficult questions. Now, back to the mystery, because the hardest test of a novel predator was still ahead, and it happened at the other end of the Earth. Everything so far took place inside a single connected landmass. Africa, Europe, Asia. Animals had been moving back and forth across those regions for millions of years, and the predators our ancestors met, however unfamiliar, were still recognizable. A cave lion is not an African lion, but it is a cat. A cave hyena is a hyena. The old templates, however strained, still applied. Then people reached Australia. Somewhere upward of 50,000 years ago, the dates are still argued over, and each new excavation shifts them. Human beings crossed open water into a continent that had been drifting in isolation for tens of millions of years. And the animals waiting there had no counterpart anywhere in human experience. The apex predator on land was a marsupial. Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion, was about the size of a large dog, but built entirely differently, with a short, deep skull and enormous blade, like cheek teeth, that worked like shears. Measured against body size, its bite is among the most powerful known for any mammalian predator. It had a huge hooked claw on each thumb, and limb proportions suggesting it climbed. Sharing that continent was Varanus priscus, sometimes called megalania, a monitor lizard perhaps 5 meters long or more, the largest terrestrial lizard known to science, a scaled-up relative of the Komodo dragon. There was quincana, a crocodile with long legs and teeth like blades that hunted away from water on dry land. There was wanambi, a constricting snake around 5 meters in length, of a lineage entirely separate from modern pythons. And there were saltwater crocodiles, which have not changed and have not gone anywhere, and which remain one of the very few animals on Earth that still occasionally treat a human being as prey. No inherited template covered any of this. A grass, colored shape by the waterhole. A hunting reptile with a stride. A cat, like animal that was not a cat, ambushing from a branch. Every rule of thumb our lineage had accumulated across 2 million years of African and Asian nights had to be rewritten by observation, by disaster, and by conversation. Then comes the twist that has occupied researchers for half a century. Not long after people arrived, within a few thousand years, by most reconstructions, most of those animals were gone. Thylacoleo, megalania, quincana, wanambi, the giant kangaroos, the rhinoceros-sized diprotodon. The debate over why is still live and still fierce. Climate was shifting. Fire regimes changed. Human hunting pressure on slow-breeding giants may have been decisive, or contributory, or minor. But there is a version of the question that is even more unsettling than the extinction itself. What if the encounter was asymmetrical from the start? What if the humans were the ones with an inherited template for meeting something new, and the predators were not? Because that, in the end, is the real reversal. The pattern repeats when people finally reach the Americas, whenever exactly the first arrivals came, and the dates keep moving earlier. They walked into a continent stocked with a fully staffed predator guild. Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, with canines like curved daggers. Panthera atrox, the American lion, larger than any lion alive. Dire wolves, heavier, jawed than gray wolves, hunting in packs. Myricynonyx, a cheetah, like cat built for speed on open plains. And Arctodus simus, the short-faced bear, so long, limbed that at a walk it stood roughly 1.5 meters at the shoulder. An animal whose diet is still debated, but whose sheer scale would have made any meeting memorable. And within a geological instant, almost all of them vanished, along with the mammoths and mastodons and ground sloths they depended on. The causes remain genuinely uncertain, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling confidence they do not have. Climate swung violently at the end of the Ice Age. Ecosystems came apart from below. Humans arrived. Untangling those threads is one of the hardest problems in the study of the past. But hold both halves of this story at once, because together they say something about our species that neither says alone. For millions of years, we were the naive animal. We were the ones walking into landscapes full of unfamiliar teeth, without the right instincts, learning by loss. Then, through fire, through weapons that killed at a distance, through cooperation, through the ability to describe an animal to someone who had never seen it, the position flipped. And now, wherever we go, we are the unfamiliar predator. We are the shape that nothing recognizes. Beef, did you I need us? One that now pine me other well. You can still watch this happen, and it is quietly one of the eeriest experiences available on Earth. Go to a place where animals evolved without us, and they will not run. Sailors reaching remote islands recorded it again and again with astonishment. Birds that could be picked up by hand. Seals that did not move. On the Galapagos, animals still walk past your boots, as though you were weather. In parts of Antarctica, penguins approach people out of what looks like nothing but interest. Naturalists gave it a name: island tameness. It is not friendliness. It is the absence of a template, the exact condition our own ancestors were in every time they crossed a mountain range. And the animals that lacked that template paid the same price our ancestors did, only faster. The moa of New Zealand, some standing taller than a person. The dodo of Mauritius, a large ground pigeon with no reason to fear anything that walked. Neither of them had a word for us. Neither had time to learn one. Which brings us back to the strangest survival in this whole story, the one you carry. The predators are gone. Cave lions, saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, the marsupial lion. Almost nowhere on Earth does a wild animal seriously hunt human beings, and the exceptions are rare enough that each one becomes news. But the alarm system never got the message. Human beings, including infants, respond to snakes with a speed and a physical intensity that is difficult to explain by learning alone. Very young children show measurable arousal at the sight of snake shapes before they can possibly have been taught to. Spiders, snakes, large cats, and looming shapes in the dark remain the most common objects of intense fear worldwide, far more common than fear of the things that actually harm us in modern life, which are overwhelmingly vehicles, illnesses, and our own habits. We are exquisitely, permanently prepared for a world that no longer exists, and it does not fade, because there is no longer any pressure to remove it. A false alarm about a stick is free. A missed snake is not. Now look at what we do with that inheritance, when it has nothing real to attach itself to. Across cultures that never met, human beings independently invented composite monsters, and the parts they chose are remarkably consistent. The sphinx, a lion's body, an eagle's wings, a human face. The griffin, eagle and lion. The dragon, reptile, with claws, and often wings. The chimera, assembled from lion and snake. The great serpents that coil at the bottom of the world in one mythology after another. Cat, bird of prey, snake. Exactly the three categories a vervet monkey has separate alarm calls for. Exactly the three signatures Bob Brain and Lee Berger read in the fossil skulls of our ancestors. The leopard's canines, the eagle's talons, and the oldest enemy of all, the one that leaves no marks on bone because it swallows. Whether that is a genuine echo or a coincidence of anatomy and imagination is not something anyone can prove. It sits in the space between archaeology and psychology where certainty is not on offer. But the pattern is there, and it is difficult to unsee. When we sat around fires and invented things to be afraid of, we did not invent freely. We reached for the shapes already waiting in us, and we built new predators out of the parts of the old ones. So, what happened when ancient humans met a predator they had never seen before? Sometimes they died, and their bones fell into a shaft beneath a tree, and 2 million years later someone fitted a leopard's jaw to the holes. Sometimes they watched, and remembered, and told the others, and the knowledge outlived the person who bought it. And eventually they did something no animal had ever done with a predator. They drew it on a wall in the dark. They carved its head onto a human body in mammoth ivory. They took the thing that had hunted their ancestors for 2 million years and made it into a god, a monster, a story, a constellation. We stopped being prey a very long time ago, but we never quite stopped being the animal that was prey. It is why the hair rises on your arms at a sound in an empty house, why the shape in the corner of your eye resolves into a coat only after your heart has already committed. That reflex is not a flaw in an otherwise rational mind. It is the oldest surviving part of you, a warning system built by animals who did not survive, handed down to one who did. And here is the part worth carrying away. Somewhere on this planet right now, an animal is looking at a human being for the first time in the history of its species, and it does not know what it is seeing. It has no call for us, no template, no inherited memory of the shape. For 4.5 billion years, that role belonged to something else. For a very short time, it has belonged to us. The question the fossil record leaves open is not whether we escaped the food web. It is what a species does with a mind that was built by being hunted once there is nothing left to run from.